So to structure our conversation, we will move from regional dynamics to global competition and finally to conflict risk and possible ways forward. Let us begin from the regional level, and I will start with Zenonas in order to set the analytical foundation of our discussion. So when we look at the regional actors such as Turkey, Israel, Egypt, Greece, and of course other Mediterranean countries, we see a mix of cooperation, competition, and maybe a strategic recalibration. So my question is, in general terms, how do you assess the role of these key regional actors that are shaping the current geopolitical dynamics in the wider region of Mediterranean?
Thank you. How much time do we have? Okay, I'll try to be quick. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's good to be with you all. This is obviously a complex issue. The actors mentioned are too many. And as you probably know and understand, the Middle East right now is at a very critical point. Many changes are taking place. War, violence, conflict, great transformations. And the truth is that we don't really know what the actual role of these states are, because things are very transitional at this point in time. So we could speak about what their role was like a couple of months ago, but right now they're all trying to recalibrate their policies to deal with the repercussions of the war on Iran, as well as the after effects of the conflict in Gaza, which some think that it's over, but it's actually not. I mean, it's an open issue. I mean, we do have a ceasefire, quote unquote, or but it's actually a very open and bloody issue still. And there's so many changes happening. For example, in Syria, with a new regime that took power there at the end of 2024. A new rivalry is emerging between, for example, Turkey and Israel, which is a big one for the region. So the question is, how will all these states, just to cut it short, how will all these states try to deal with these new dynamics, whether they will take sides in the new regional order that will emerge after the war on Iran, which might take a while, or whether they will find new formulas of collaborating with each other. Unfortunately, I'm not too hopeful about that, because the historical background, what we know about the Middle East, is that relations there are not usually conducive to peace. They're more often prone to conflict. So my main concern is that after this war on Iran, which again, I don't see it finishing, even if it's actually finished, it will have implications that will still affect the region. So my concern is that new rivalries and new potential conflicts will emerge on the day after. On that hopeful note, maybe.
No, just a follow-up question. Do you see any other emerging regional actors, either state or non-state actors?
Yes, of course. Right now there is an effort, especially from the United States, in conjunction with Israel at the region, to take out or limit the power and influence of certain non-state or semi-state actors like Hamas and Hezbollah. Hamas being the military organization in Gaza, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So these will be of historical importance if it actually happens. It's questionable how effectively it will happen. So that's a big question. What the new actors might be. I mean, I don't see any actual new non-state actors. I don't see that actually civil society is becoming more important, to be honest. There are initiatives at the track 2 level, meaning the level of civil society. Broadly speaking, this is happening both in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, and in other places. But unfortunately, in this kind of an environment, what always is prioritized is usually leaderships. And leaderships take over, and leaderships are the ones who set the agenda based on great power politics and how those are manifested in the region. So I don't see any new actors as such, but I see old actors acquiring new roles. And Saudi Arabia is one of them. Israel and Turkey, as I mentioned, are two others, and we could talk about more as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to the wider picture and to Dr. Kondos. Michalis, I know that you're very interested about the systemic level analysis and the role that plays.
We said no academic terms.
No. Yes. I think it's not too heavy a terminology. So, of course, there is a growing view that the Mediterranean is becoming, let's say, a reflection of the wider systemic change. So, how do you see the Mediterranean, and if the developments in the Mediterranean reflect to the broader shifts in the global and regional balance of power?
Thank you, Marino. This is indeed an issue of paramount significance in the study of contemporary international relations. I will try to answer by giving you some timelines and some chains of events that can help you understand my understanding of how the global system has evolved during the crucial period between 2003 and up to date, or until recently, 2020 or so, which I think this is a crucial period that we need to delve into in order to understand the changes that have either provoked the ongoing developments in the Eastern Mediterranean or have been affected by them. There is a mutually reinforcing relationship. To explain how the international system has evolved, we need to first underline that this timeline begins at the end of the Cold War. It begins at the early 1990s, when the United States, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, remains the only global superpower, namely the only great power with the capacity to project and exercise military power at a global scale, and the country whose economic capacity is so immense that it controls essentially the whole global economic system. Very roughly, this is not an absolute statement, but to a serious extent, I think it describes the situation in the 1990s. This situation of one superpower feeling that it's the winner of the preceding Cold War has brought about specific ramifications and interactions. First of all, it pushed the United States towards a trajectory of overexpansion. What do we mean by overexpansion? When you feel that you can do a lot of things with the power that you have not done in the past because of pre-existing restrictions that are not in place right now, it's like feeling that nothing can stop you. You feel omnipotent, you feel invincible. And this is when you catch yourself into the trap. The United States moved feeling invincible and very much powerful to rearrange the world, and particularly the Middle East, according to its own self-perception, according to its own self-image. This is reflected in the so-called regime change operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, two very long-lasting and costly wars that cost what we may call a strategic overexpansion, which means the means of the United States were spread thin to such an extent that a destruction was caused. During the trajectory of this overexpansion, when the United States was fighting one war after another, arguing that we are now changing the world at our image, there was a initially silent and behind the scenes effort of hedging and concentrating powers to balance or to start balancing this US overexpansion, which was perceived as dangerous by other decision-making centers. And eventually, we had the rise of China as the economically most vibrant country in the world. Let me just give you some figures, indicative. In 1980, the Chinese GDP as a percentage of the US GDP was 7%. In 2015, it was 61%. During this period. In 2025, it's 63.3%. So imagine what kind of calculations were made in these two decision makers while this was happening and while this incoming information was being processed by these decision-making centers. So we had the beginning of a reversing trends. The same goes with Russia as well. We saw the beginning of the Russian revisionism, territorial revisionism, when Russia felt that the US power and global influence had reached its peak and it couldn't threat the Russian revisionist purposes anymore. It started in 2008 and it peaked in 2014 and 2022. Let me give you my last timeline to understand these ups and downs, basically to understand the downs of the US global primacy. In 2011, we had the military withdrawal of the United States from Iraq, which in my view was the beginning of the end of the US primacy, at least in terms of dominant perceptions. In the same year, we have ISIS marching in Iraq, using weapons abandoned by the United States while withdrawing. In 2011, the same year, we had the outburst of the Syrian civil war. In 2013, 2 years later, we have Russia increasing its naval presence in the Mediterranean while the American Sixth Fleet was withdrawing from the Mediterranean. The same year, the summer of 2013, we have Obama, President of the United States, drawing a red line that if the Assad regime in Syria uses chemical weapons, I will intervene militarily. In September of 2013, 2 months later, we have this red line wiped away because the United States proved itself in the world that it couldn't be an intervening factor in the Middle East anymore. 3 days before this development, September 2013, China announces the Belt and Road Initiative. 3 days before. And in 2015, Russia intervenes in Syria. The first military intervention of Russia in the Middle East. So imagine all these developments, all this chain of events, how it's being processed by the United States in Washington. And in 2017, we had the official return of the US effort to balance its rival great powers under the national security strategy of Trump 1.0 administration, bringing back great power politics as a central dynamic in contemporary international relations. This is the, as briefly as I could, the image of the evolution of the international system that is affecting nowadays our region.
Thank you very much, Michalis. In the second round of questions, we can talk about if the dominant perception of all of these actors still exists today. Now I'm going to Dr. Dimitras. I know, Dr. Dimitras, that you are doing a lot of research about energy, which is often presented either as a driver of cooperation or a potential source of tension in some cases. Since we are talking about the Mediterranean region, so to what extent the so-called Mediterranean as an energy hub, is it actually a strategic narrative? Is it something that can happen? What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today. I was hoping to start from where Michalis left, and really I was keen to ask in the discussion, have the United States ever won a war from Vietnam to the day? But anyway, I'm not going to tease you with that.
It depends on the media.
But thank you for this, because I think, energy is...
Say half, I will tell you later.
Please, yes. Energy is part and parcel, if not of the substance, at least of the narrative. And we've seen it coming up in the case of Venezuela, but now Iran as well. So your question was, is it a strategic narrative or is it a geopolitical reality? Can it become an energy hub? And I really answer the question with a question: who says it? What do we mean by it? What do we mean by a hub? And who defines it? Is it governments or is it the companies? Because if the companies are asked, they would tell you no, never ever. But would you ask the governments, and you think that because of nice tripartites, quadripartites, trilaterals, name it what you want, there will be a drilling ship tomorrow operating here, which we haven't actually seen since 2010. Because obviously politics and economics or technology and companies for that matter have very different timelines, very different concerns and considerations. For the companies, the usual depth of time is anything between 20 to 30 years for them to start having actual profits out of it. For governments is today and the next elections. But people think, at least in this part of the world, that it is states and alliances and organizations like the European Union that pay. No, neither states pay for this nor organizations. It's companies that pay. At best, companies even pay roughly 26, 27% of the cost. The rest is paid by the banks. And the banks, when asked by the companies, they say, are we going to get our money back? When? Under what conditions? And so the risk firms asked by the banks would tell you that in this volatile region, risk is fairly high. So even if you do get your money back, it's going to be in a different timeline, under different conditions. So why don't you start charging immense fees as insurance and other things? And that's why since 2010, we haven't really moved on this, because it has been politics that has informed the debate, rather with very little grounding, if you like, on economics or technology. I recall traveling to Lebanon in 2013, 2014. On the way to the airport, you see those wonderful holograms of bridges and hospitals and buildings say, thank God for the gas. I haven't seen anything flowing for the time being. So again, it was the politics. So I think we need to go beyond this fixated discussion on hub. A hub is a very different thing. It's a commercial term that indicates a demand and a supply, and certainly there has been no demand for the time being. I usually say that cooperation is like cholesterol. There is good cooperation and bad cooperation. So if cooperation is designed or ends up in being exclusionary, then it's going to be short-lived. And hence you have countries that have been left out intentionally or unintentionally, and they make it very, very difficult for others to proceed. Now, the discussion was, I think, wrong always right from the beginning. The discussion we had was could the Eastern Mediterranean become an important contributor to the European energy security for a decade or two? This would never have been the case because the East Med gas is too little, too expensive to contribute to the needs of the European Union. You know, globally speaking, if you sit in the seat of a CEO of an international oil corporation in Houston and look at the globe, the whole of the East Med, including the large reserves of Israel and Egypt, account for 2% globally. So, and a very risk-prone region and very great depths and earthquake-prone and all. So we need to change our mentality about it. The reserves are there. The reserves are important to serve the needs of the regional states and hopefully lead to cooperation. But if we start talking about grand designs of contributing to European energy needs, I think it's a wrong departure point. So basically you have a narrative versus a reality. And I think you were spot on in saying, is it a geopolitical reality or is it a narrative? To the day, it has more been a narrative than a geopolitical reality. Again, I think it's important if we reconceptualize those reserves, which are not negligible, important for the region, rather than a grander design, and a political design behind it to say, how can we become rich so that we have the upper hand in negotiations vis-a-vis various member states, then I think it's the wrong departure point. Energy brought together some, but it also drove away others. And here we need to see a cost-benefit analysis at the end of the day. I would suggest that we try to be constructive through deconstruction. Deconstruct myths and deconstruct expectations, because this is exactly what led us up to here. The example that springs to mind is how many times have we had this discussion even in Cyprus? Since 2010 and the first reserves, we're going to become a hub ourselves. We're going to have to be super rich. I recall Minister Lakotripis in 2013. He said verbatim on TV at the time that by 2017, the average Cypriot's income will treble. Well, it hasn't happened until now. Maybe it will happen in the future. But what I mean to say, this created an expectation which led developments in one direction rather than looking at pragmatic, realistic solutions on the ground. Unfortunately, commercially, what made sense was never going to fly politically, with the inclusion of other states in the region and other modes of transportation. That's what companies see. States see something different. But the unfortunate result is that going up 30,000 feet, looking at the region, looking at Europe, we have managed to do pretty much everything wrong. And now the European Union, Europe itself, has replaced one dependency to Russia with another dependency to the United States. And I'm afraid that this might prove to be even more insecure than Russia. Lately, they run to Qatar, too late, too little. Qatar cannot, before even the war, deliver. But Qatar, interestingly enough, said, okay, let's discuss, but of course on a very different economic basis, but you need to take two things out, sustainability and methane emissions, which of course the European Union cannot do, understandably. And so that's why I'm saying, that if it is only politics that inform the debate, then we have a problem. I don't think that energy brings peace, but peace does bring energy. Yeah. And so in this respect, I would suggest that we really become pragmatic if our future beyond short political terms is concerned, to try and negotiate arrangements with friends, with less friends, with lesser friends, that will allow us to be super pragmatic in making sure that we are all united by the bonds of common suffering, especially now after the war. We're also bound by the bonds of common opportunity, but opportunity that can only be availed of through cooperation. So I'd like to make the case for cooperation beyond the traditional lines of what we had. Zenonas, I'm grateful you said about leadership, and that, I'm afraid, is the problem. It's a top-down process here. But I also recalled Aravella earlier on talking about critical thought. How do we use this critical thought in order to call to order the leaders that otherwise make the decisions, create a cost for that? Yes. So I would call for pragmatism, but principled pragmatism. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Even that you deconstructed a lot of imagination that I had to proceed with the global dimension of this discussion. My question is to Zenonas, and it's about the role of European Union, who often position itself as a normative actor, and the last years as a potential security or defense actor. So my question is, if European Union can actually play a role to shape stability, governance, and cooperation in not only the Mediterranean, but in general, in Europe and in the world?
That's a good question for the European Union. It could potentially play that role. It doesn't want to, apparently. There are many objective constraints to that. But let me not be entirely cynical here. Especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we've seen, Europe sort of pushed into into a series of initiatives or discussions about how the future of the European Union would look like, and what the necessities are, what the gaps are, which capacities does the European Union need to develop so that it's able to have a more substantial role. So there has been some progress, and I would say that after Ukraine, Gaza, and now Iran, this is a series of events that sort of are making this realization much more tangible that we actually need to do something, not just because world transformations are so radical and so rapid, but also because our main partner, the United States, is very inconsistent, actually even hostile at some times. So how do we deal with that? How do we take back our sort of the initiative and sort of become independent from and autonomous from the security structures and other structures and dependencies that we have with the United States? How are we going to develop a more active role in the world? How are we to be more constructive in areas like the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and so on? So the quick answer is that Europe could potentially play a bigger role. Right now, it does not have the, let's say, I wouldn't say the capacity. It could have the capacity if it wanted to, but just like Harry said before, the political will is not there. Because for Europe to play a more important role, a more catalytic and effective role, it first needs to breach different national interests within the European Union. And not all European states, EU member states, are willing to do that, to cede more of their initiative and more of their sovereignty to supranational institutions of the European Union and create more rigid European, coherent European policies. So my recommendation, my desire would be to see the European Union being more active, because as opposed to the United States, at least at this point in time, the European Union remains to a large extent a normative power. So it is a power that can actually pursue the principles, keep things at check. I mean, there's been a fallback on that as well. There's been a decline to that as well in the European Union, but at least we are at a better place than the United States. I mean, the Washington has just given up on international law altogether. So the EU needs to fill that gap, needs to fill that vacuum of of doing away with international law, with human rights, with principles, with norms, with values. We actually need to be the ones as European Union to bring that back and actually conduct policy on that basis, so that we are actually constructive in a meaningful way, not just a transactional way, in areas like like our region, Cyprus, Gaza, we have Syria, we have the Kurds in Syria, we have different religious communities, we have Lebanon, which is going through a humanitarian crisis and a political crisis, we have Iran and the Gulf states. So all of that these are huge problems, and the EU could actually play a more effective role rather than just funding projects and giving different kinds of financial or other kinds of support without actually having the proper mechanisms to observe the processes, to actually have deliverable results, to be able to offer more help in building capacities rather than just funding stuff without actually knowing where the money goes very often. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Just a quick comment about, if we can have a quick comment about the new initiatives, about the increase of the defense budget and the efforts for a military and defense interoperability among the EU member states.
There's also been a decision today about Article 42.7 of, about mutual defense, which seems to be going, for further discussions and a decision. So all that fall within the category that I mentioned before, that there is some ground covered, that there is some progress. And I'm all for that progress, although, there's, a footnote that needs to be done here, like who is to benefit from all that? There is this whole discussion about defense industries and all that, so we need to keep that into account. We do want a secure Europe. We do want a Europe that is not dependent on others for its own security, yes, but at the same time we need to be conscious of, of the balance between, financial costs, who benefits, societal needs, and all of that. Otherwise, we will end up in a new sort of European industrial complex, defense industrial complex, that will be at the cost of European citizens and European economies on the altar of new conflicts and war. So the point here is not to actually engage in more war as European states. The point is to be able, as a union, to have deterrence capabilities, to have security and defense capabilities, with actually having the urge to conduct war at every corner. Just like other powers have done in the past. Because the threats are real. There are real threats, especially if you ask Europeans, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, they'll tell you about Russia. In the South, if you ask Cyprus, Turkey is a huge concern. So there are specific concerns, but they need to be put into perspective and not just have Europe become another war machine, basically. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Michalis, in your previous intervention, you analyzed very briefly the role of big players, United States, Russia, and China. So the question is, are we moving to a more multipolarity or in a more fragmented and unpredictable landscape?
Well, I'm now trying to fight the temptation of answering to Harry's question before, because I think it is very much relevant with what we're discussing right now, and very much relevant with your question. Harry before asked me whether the United States even won a war. I must say that you need to make a distinction between wars fought in a contested and competitive international system and wars fought in an international system without serious competition. In the international system without serious competition, the United States have won 2 wars, in the Persian Gulf in 1991 and in Yugoslavia. Right. I'm not saying that they didn't create a mess. I'm saying that they won. In
someone else's mess.
Someone else's mess, yeah. In contested international environments, which constitutes the vast majority of post-World War II history, the United States again won 2 wars. 2 wars against 2 major powers in the Central Americas. One against Grenada in 1983, this huge great power that produces so much nutmeg, and one against the Dominican Republic. These are the 2 victories in contested international environments of the United States. So, yeah.
Trump doesn't know where Yugoslavia is.
Yeah, yeah.
Melania.
Okay, you are distracting me very much because you are making me very much tempted to make other comments now. Now I will resist. Yeah, the question, Marinos, can you repeat it? Because in the process I forgot it.
If we are moving to a more
Yeah.
landscape.
We are, as Zenonas said before, we are in a period of transition. We are in a transitionary international system. This means that we don't have a clear-cut polarity in the international system right now. It used to be a unipolar international system, and now it's transitioning towards either multipolar or bipolar or something that we cannot perceive and understand and contextualize with the existing analytical tools. So we are in a transitioning period. This transitioning period generates tensions and uncertainty. Some of the conflicts that have erupted over the past 5, maybe 10 years, they have been seriously affected or even provoked by the uncertainty of the transitionary international system. I said before that great powers make risky steps when they believe that they have the capacity to do so, when they feel invincible. Let me give you the example of Russia. Russia returning as a great power in a transitionary international system when Russia believed, and rightfully believed, that the United States was withdrawing. Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Where does this war take Russia now? It helped Russia gain extra territory of about 30 miles in Ukraine, but at the same time, because of this overexpansive military action, which was provoked by calculations related to the transitionary international system, Russia lost its influence in Cyprus to a large extent, Greece to a large extent, and in Syria. Plus, it lost Finland and Sweden's neutrality. So Russia now, due to a miscalculation that was provoked by the perception of a transitioning international system, is a territorially bigger country, but a smaller great power. So these are an example of the effects of the transitioning international system.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I mean, we heard about the war in Iran, the war in our neighborhood, in Lebanon. My question is to Dr. Dimitras about the role of diplomacy, and if there is a space for diplomacy, regional cooperation, international law, because we see a lot of violation of the international law, not only the last month, but the last years.
No, it's very unfortunate to us professors of international law. That's a very difficult time. It's but you're right. I think we live in an era of the normalization of the exception and the legitimization of bullying, let alone the death of the international legal order as we knew it until now. Diplomacy is the one and only role, especially for the case of states like Cyprus. I'm afraid that the exact opposite has been the case very often, including this Iran war. This is my very personal view, but I was from shocked to disgusted that the European Union has not seemed, to my eyes, to have been pursuing any parallel serious effort of diplomatic solution to the Iran war, important as the operational issues might be. I haven't seen the European Union doing that. I haven't seen it even in the case of Cyprus, where There were lukewarm reactions. Yes, Greece came under conditions that we can discuss. The British, whose base was hit, remind me of the lyrics of Robbie Williams. I'm contemplating, thinking about thinking. They sent a destroyer 3 weeks later, and then Macron came. Forgive me for saying, but I don't think for Cyprus, but for Lebanon more. Germany's first reaction was no, because constitutionally we're not allowed to. And then politically we're convinced to send a couple of frigates they had in the region for other reasons. That's not diplomacy to me. And President Christodoulidis, forgive me for saying, again, it's my view, and who am I to say, but I think the Cyprus presidency could not see the war coming, and this was a huge blow. On the other hand, it could have been a huge opportunity for the president of Cyprus, as representing the European Union, to crisscross Europe and the world, initiating a diplomatic effort in parallel. Would it have led anywhere? Perhaps not. But it would have saved the European Union's DNA for what it about is. It's not about wars, and Zenonas, you're right. It's not about only to become a great geopolitical power. It's about the DNA of the European Union is something very different. And I'm afraid we lost this opportunity. And to my eyes, both the presidency was understandably okay, fine. But the European Union itself, I'm ashamed. I'm sorry to say. And to extend my thought on I'm trying to be constructive with the presidency. I know that the mode was in at least for the month of March to freeze any meetings, do them online. No, I would have brought them here. This is what resilience would really have been for the European Union commissioners to be here in the EU member state and presidency of the member state that was hit. I don't care if it was the British base; it was the geography of Cyprus. So I think diplomacy is not only important, it's the only way out, especially for places like Cyprus. I have the same discussions in Greece sometimes. How do Cyprus and Greece expect to survive in a world with only hard power? How? The only thing that puts us together is the one shield that smaller states have is international law, institutions, organizations, processes that I'm afraid have been dealt a huge blow. Yeah. And I'll also try to be fairly constructively critical if possible. We have contributed to the feeding of the beast. In the past, you mentioned the relations to Moscow. Russia was very close to be rounding it to Cyprus. Later on, both Cyprus and Greece joined as observer states the Board of Peace of Mr. Trump, that to my mind undermines very directly the United Nations. So what if tomorrow morning Mr. Putin says, I want to have a board of peace for Ukraine, and Xi Jinping says, I want to have a board of peace for Taiwan, and Mr. Erdogan says, I want to have a board of peace for Northern Cyprus? What do? We also, President Christodoulidis and Prime Minister Mitsotakis visited Netanyahu in Tel Aviv because the poor guy can't travel due to the indictment of the ICC. Are we undermining international rules through that? Orban, at least, had the guts of leaving the statute of the ICC before entertaining Israel as such. So I'm saying this is a political decision, and it's absolutely fine for the governments to take it, balancing things. But to my mind, willingly or unwillingly, they undermine the international structures, legal structures, and processes and organizations that to me are existential for the case of places like Cyprus. I think we pay the price for the erosion of international legal rules, and we create a very dystopic environment nowadays. Again, how do we expect to survive? We buy things from this and that and the other. Yeah, there will always be more wealthy clients, and there will always be clients that have no accountability. We do, thankfully, as part of the European Union. Other EU member states do. But if you present a certain president of a certain big state with a big check of billions, I think he or she, hopefully in the future, goes in that direction. And so again, it is the rules and principles that we have spent decades trying to develop that hold us together. To my mind, and I hope to be wrong, we are betting on the wrong horse, on the wrong race, and on the wrong sport. If the EU wishes to become more geopolitical, which is understandable in political terms, to me it has to become more transactional, i.e. less principled. But that's not the EU I know or wish to be part of.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This is not the end of the panel. We have another 10 minutes, and this is your opportunity. In case you have any questions to our panelists, please raise your hand, state your name, surname, your organization, and of course, in which panelist is the question.
Very brief. My name is Nagme, and I'm from Denmark, also Iranian. I have a question. Why is the EU? I mean, you explained that they are not doing, enough diplomacy. Could you elaborate on what is the reason? I mean, we have a large diaspora in Europe from Iran who is very pro-war, but that cannot be the only reason. If you could elaborate on that, thank you.
Velez with UNHCR. What about neighbors towards the south, like Egypt? How does that factor? Any thoughts on how that factors in with the geopolitical analysis we so deliciously have heard so far? And maybe a second question to sneak in. Any views on the impact of forced displacement elements into forced displacement? I mean, especially Syria being freshly...
Yeah.
A lot of Syrians are returning, Lebanese are following. So any thoughts that you might have on that would be great.
Okay, let's take another one.
Yes,
And then we're going to have a second round of questions.
I'm here in this side. Sara Presiani from Euromed Rights Network. I mean, you mentioned bringing values. I perfectly agree. I think the European Union has to be back to their values. Also, in the interest of investment, cannot be investment without rule of law and a healthy judicial system. But how credible we are if we're not moving forward in revision of Article 2 of trade agreement with some country. There is a clear violation of Article 2. I'm thinking on the association agreement with Israel, but also in many countries. How we can be credible without this process and how the Council can proceed somehow. And then very concrete question, what about Algeria concerning energy? Can be a potential partner in this perspective? I'm heading here.
Iran has been portrayed and has been perceived as a threat for many years for the West. So yes, European states will not actually attack Iran, at least not for the time being. But that doesn't mean that they will not sit back and watch Iran burn. If that means that this will bring about a structural change in the Middle East that will be more conducive to how they understand a regional order in the Middle East and their own interests, for example. And taking a hit, at energy prices and some inflation for about a year is not a big cost to pay for such a change to happen. So that's a very cynical and I believe true reading of the situation. Can I take a couple of more very briefly?
Yes,
very briefly. NATO, no one knows what will happen to NATO. I mean, if the US wants to, if Trump says that he wants to get out of NATO, I mean, no one should actually believe Trump about anything he says. He lost that, luxury. So just don't listen to him. I'm not sure he actually takes any decisions. He messes things. He intervenes in things, then institutions try to fix things. It's a whole mess. But I don't think that actually getting out, I mean, Michalis might have an idea about this, but I don't think that actually getting out of NATO is an option for the United States right now. Maybe in the future. But the rift is definitely there when it comes to the US and the European Union, and unless there is a change, there is a post-Trump situation that is not, for example, J.D. Vance, things might actually get better, but not necessarily. And I mean, let's just move on.
Yes. Just a brief comment about, I know forecasts or predictions are not good words in academia.
Yeah, sure.
It's not like weather where you have a forecast. But let's have your thoughts about the future of NATO, Michalis.
Yeah, I totally agree with Zenonas. If we see how President Trump has used NATO so far, he has used it as a field, as a venue as a venue to unfold his coercive diplomacy against the Europeans. So he has a leverage against the Europeans provided by the United States' centrality in NATO and the Europeans' need of NATO.
Exactly.
If the United States withdraw from NATO, this leverage is gone. Of course, this is a rational line of thinking, and as Zenonas said, we should not assume that when President Trump makes statements, these are driven by rationality, at least not by 100%. But there is a more realist scenario that the United States may decrease its military footprint in Europe. This, I think, might be a real scenario. In that case, what happens to NATO? There are two scenarios. Scenario number one, if the Europeans are capable of stepping in and fill the gap, NATO survives. Scenario number two, if the Europeans cannot make up for the losses of the American hard power that has been withdrawn from Europe, NATO either collapses or transforms to something totally different.
Thank you very much. Another question about the role of regional actors and regional states like Egypt. Harry, I think that you can take this one.
I'll try. On NATO, two words. I don't think the United States will be leaving NATO. We had this discussion before regarding others. I recall Turkey had a lot of discussion. We'll be leaving. You never leave an organization where you have a veto power. As simple as that to me. So they won't. But I agree very much that the scenarios are there. What do we make of it? And it's something that we need to think a little further, because European security architecture without NATO or the United States would be a very different thing. And to extend the thought and be slightly provocative, for instance, a European security architecture without the United States would require others in. And it is, to my mind, incomprehensible that you discuss pragmatically about a security architecture in Europe without Turkey, for instance. And there we have very difficult discussions in other places. I'm well aware that that NATO has surfaced recently in a discussion in Cyprus. I don't think there's any substance to this. Hopefully I'm wrong. But I was asked recently, are you afraid that Turkey is going to say no? I said, I'm afraid if Turkey says yes, because you remember what happened with Sweden and Finland. It took 10 months of negotiations. And if I understand it correctly, Turkey got back my arm's length of other requests they have. So I think it's a discussion to be had very, very carefully in this respect. Now, on Egypt. Egypt has been portrayed as a fantastic ally for all these years. I would say alignment rather than alliance. We've discussed it with Zenonas again and again on this matter. But it's also, on the one hand, you have the political decisions. Yes, it's an important ally. On the other hand, we turn a blind eye to a number of things that happened to Egypt, as we've turned a blind eye to other things that happened in Syria. We have Sarah now, I think we are hosting him these days. Human rights have been out of the door. Other problems, so obviously realpolitik-wise, yes, but I think, we can't, we need to have a red line at some point. How do we balance principles with pragmatism? Algeria was also brought in. I think Algeria is something that is pursued very well and very closely by certain European states, like Spain, for that matter, on energy in particular. The southern part of the Mediterranean has a value added in energy discussions, which I think can be political as well. It is the only area where you can massively deploy renewable sources, because they have physically the space to do it, be it in Egypt, in Algeria, in Morocco, in other places. So pragmatically speaking, if Europe wanted to go in a direction that will get it away from dependencies, and if we had done it before, we wouldn't have this discussion now, then I think, the North Africa does have a role to play in this respect. Yeah.
We have another 5 minutes since one of our speakers. About the forced displacement?
I don't know.
I can do that. I mean,
I don't know,
you
please.
can do maybe Article 2 about the trade agreement and all. You want to comment on that?
I don't know the matter.
Okay, okay.
So,
I
we
can
would like to
just
comment?
just
Yes.
a quick comment on displacement. I'm not sure what the exact question is. Obviously, there's many changes in the region. The new Syrian situation is both hopeful and risky in the sense that it's not a country where the rule of law prevails. It's not a country where the government actually exercises sovereignty effectively. There are many gaps, security, legal, and otherwise, but at the same time, the new state of affairs has been conducive to many people returning, tens of thousands at least, in my knowledge, from abroad to Syria, refugees, and also tens of thousands displaced people, both from northwestern Syria, the Idlib province, as well as from eastern Syria to areas like Afrin, including both Arabs and Kurds. Big picture, I would say that things are better now. Problem right now is in Lebanon, obviously. It's a huge problem, more than 1 million people displaced from southern Lebanon. And actually, Lebanon is a time bomb when it comes to refugees and displaced people, because more conflict, more humanitarian crisis, more economic problems, more political crisis have actually started creating new refugee waves slowly. But you know things better than we do. We've had it twice. I mean, 2006 is a big event, and obviously yes, in 1980s. So my concern is for Lebanon, about Lebanon right now, for many reasons, and hopefully this ceasefire will last. Hopefully it will bring better results. Not very hopeful, because I believe the strategic imagination for the region coming from Israel is very specific. And actually, this leads me to believe that the Iran war is not over. Don't listen things about ceasefires and stuff like that. The U.S. will probably be happy with an agreement that even some sort of a capitulation from Iran, but Israel will not. Israel will actually want regime change in Iran. And this is scary to think about, because we're talking about months and even years ahead that might take for this to happen. Think about Assad. The overthrow of Assad was a strategic objective that started being pursued in 2011 and was achieved in 2024. So,
Thank you.
Replace it with whom? I mean,
well, yeah. No one wants that regime, but it is what it is. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this panel. If I can ask the next more academic
be very
question.
brief.
So Anna Ilievska, American University of Beirut, Paphos. All my students here, 80% of them are Lebanese. They can speak a lot about to this issue. So now, Dr. Tziarras, I agree with you that it's not enough to just drop funding here at the margins of Europe, right, to kind of make us satisfied. And now it's gotten even worse. Just a couple of days ago, the EU released a new Horizon tenders. The first topic is defense. What are we supposed to do with that?
I didn't know about that.
Yes, now the EU grants that are extremely laborious and based on a scientific 100-page applications. So now here from Cyprus, based in these regions, how are we supposed to apply for this? Defense of whom? Against whom? Is the battle going to happen here? Are we giving our own tools to Europe? Who in Brussels
Against
decided?
Hezbollah would be a good good pitch.
Who didn't ask the question?
Hello. Melanie from AUB and Paphos as well. Dr. Harry, you briefly mentioned this, but I wanted to ask about what it says about the European values of human rights to be welcoming Ahmad al-Shara, the Syrian president here, with all the persecution of religious and ethnic minorities in Syria. Is it just interest in the new neoliberal market policies they're taking on? What does it say if they were so against Assad, but now that maybe he's more open to their market policies, they're welcoming him and removing the sanctions while he gets more oppressive with the people there?
Let's have another question. Trying to group them.
Hello.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So Muhammad from AUB Mediterranean. We actually studied your text, the Comfortable Quasi-Alliance.
More citations for you.
Yeah, with Dr. Leandros Fischer. My question is regarding the relationship between Turkey and Israel. You said that there is a rising rivalry between Turkey and Israel currently, but looking back like some years ago, it was the exact opposite. The relationship was quite like good between Turkey and Israel. So what changed between these two countries? Yeah, thank you.
Another one question, and then we have to conclude.
Yeah, I wanted to ask from the academics specifically the term Middle East. Why do we still use this term, and who is this East to? I think it's from colonial origins, and even on the board it says Middle East still. And my second question is regarding diplomacy. Why do we put so much trust in diplomacy? I can use the example of where I'm from. I'm from Pakistan, and they recently hosted talks with Iran and the United States. Now, how are we sure that these talks were authentically from Pakistan or initiated by Pakistan, or were not the agenda where Pakistan acted as puppets of the American political forces? Thank you.
I think we have a last question.
The gender imbalance questions.
Yes, thank you for the interesting discussion. Yeah, coming from Cyprus and growing with the terms of United Nations and relations with the Cyprus problem, I didn't hear anything about United Nations during your panel. I apologize if I missed it.
United who?
Okay, so that was what, and in relation to the Cyprus problem as well, geopolitical tensions, and if you see any opportunities coming for the Cyprus problem and negotiations.
Okay, thank you very much. So answering all of these questions, please also have your concluding remarks. Mihaly, would you like to start?
We skipped you before. So.
No. Actually, I feel very much unqualified to answer most of the questions that have been asked, but I will try to deal with some of them. First of all, regarding the Horizon Fund and the focus on defense, I haven't heard it like Zenonas. It's the first time I hear it, but I need to say that I expected it. This is a logic which I usually don't understand most of the times, that has been implemented in previous schemes as well. The European Union is like falling in the bowl with the food, trying to eat as much as it can, whatever the bowl is in front of it, and skipping everything else and sidelining everything else. It's the resumption of the same story that was happening in the past. For example, before that, the central the motto and the central objective was how to make the transitions, either the digital or the green transitions. So everything was focused on these schemes, and this is the frame where the social scientists like us were sidelined. Actually, we came to witness the so-called Arab Spring around us at a time when social scientists were getting almost 0% out of the European Union's funding schemes. And the European Union was looking for advice on what is happening around us without funding any social scientists in the frame of its research schemes. Now it's reversing in the same, however, way. At least this is my understanding of the situation. I'm out of this business for a long time.
Mihaly, a brief comment about the role of UN?
Yeah, about the UN.
Brief comment, I know.
Yeah.
You have a lot of comments.
Briefer than the funds available.
The United Nations I'm actually currently teaching international organizations, and I'm pretty much affected by this. Well, the United Nations so far has been a very much resilient international organization. What is taking place right now is, in terms of real politics, it's not fundamentally different to what has been happening ever since the inauguration of the United Nations. Great powers during the Cold War, for example, have sidelined the United Nations to a very much extent. Remember, for example, that veto in the Security Council was very, very often used during the Cold War. It was reduced post-Cold War, and now it comes back. So it's like the United Nations adapting according to the environment. What is changing, though, is that for the first time, the primary founder of the United Nations organization, which is the United States of America, looks like hating it so much and sounds like hating it so much. This is what is different in our contemporary juncture. But again, if the United States remain a democratic country and the administration changes, maybe this set of perceptions will change in the next 3 or 4 years. And the question about there was a question about Pakistan and America, which I missed because I was thinking of your Middle East demonstration, which I will also refer to. But can you please repeat it?
I wanted to ask about the authenticity of diplomacy and how we know that it works. And I gave the example of Pakistan because they held talks between Iran and the
yes, they're mediating.
I'm not so sure whether these talks were held by Pakistan itself or was it acting as a puppet and it was through just the US channel.
Well,
No.
to my understanding, it looks like it depends on whom Donald Trump trusts more.
And Iran.
And Iran, yes.
And Iran. There should be a common ground of trust.
Yes.
Because diplomacy is about personalizing politics. So far, we have been discussing politics in a broader systemic sphere. Now we are bringing our discussion to the level of diplomacy, which is equally, if not more important. And in terms of personalized politics, you have to trust someone in order to sit on the same table with your opponent. And in the case of Pakistan, they found a common ground of trust. And personally, I think in the face of the chief of the Pakistani military forces, who looks like Donald Trump's favorite foreign military leader for reasons that are beyond my comprehension.
Thank you very much,
And
Mihaly.
on the Middle East, academic politicians use terms in order to achieve political objectives. Academics use terms in order to codify their thoughts and their research outcomes.
Gain more citations.
When it comes, maybe, yes. When it comes to myself, I will gladly replace every use of the term Middle East with the use West Asia. It makes no difference to me. But I understand the importance of your comment and the context of your comment.
Thank you very much, Mihaly. Any last comments from Mr. Dimitras?
Yeah, gladly. Zenonas know I've used it before, but I always like to quote Andrei Gromyko when he was the foreign secretary of the Soviet Union. When he was asked by journalists, how would you assess relations with the West in one word? He said, good. And in 2 words, not good. So effectively, this is where we stand. On defense, 2 things. I'd like to suggest, contra to Horizon 2020, that we stop thinking of security in narrow terms. And I very much liked your comments earlier on today. We desperately need to open up the agenda to understand of security in climate, in water, in human security, in gender, in food, in human rights, And I would also suggest that we replace high politics with low politics, because the environment is going to come and bite us more than the high politics we've done until now. That, to me, is the real high politics. Secondly, we need to, I think, be cognizant of the security dilemma in the north of Europe not being shared by the south. This fixation with Russia as a threat, which I understand, perhaps I even share to a point, of the Nordics, of the Baltics, of Poland, of Germany, I understand that. But it's very difficult to convince the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the Maltese, the Greeks, the Cypriots, that it's an existential threat in the same way, and that they need to spend every good penny they have to support that. To put it differently, I'm not quite sure if you can convince the Southern Europeans that the Northern brethren would run with the same haste to their assistance if they faced a threat from a neighbor and spend all of what they had for that. So I'm not quite sure this will take us further. Two brief comments and I'm finishing up. The EU in the region. The perception and the underlying perception, perhaps it's not the reality, but perception becomes the reality at the end of the day, of the EU in this region has been tarnished as never before. The EU is perceived as without credibility, without leverage, without impact, without this, without that. It's an input and output crisis, a leadership crisis, in other things. So it really, really needs to put itself together if it wishes to have a leverage here. On the UN, I'm afraid, it boils down to money, because the US has been the #1 provider for the UN. Without the US money, it's struggling. In Cyprus, it's closing down, I'm afraid, in many respects. UNFICYP was always 1,160. Now it's 798 and dying. The OSASG, what Espen Bertheude used to be, the special advisor to the Secretary General, the position doesn't exist as of the 1st of January anymore. And the good offices in Cyprus were 20, they became 13. Now they're 8, it's closing down. But I think we should have thought about that when we don't progress on the Cyprus problem, because obviously that's what we're leading at. So my final comment is, we can't take things for granted anymore. Nothing what we knew of granted, friends, enemies, allies, is not there. Plus, to me, the combined effect of Syria, of Ukraine, of Gaza, of Iran, of Nagorno-Karabakh, means that there is no such thing as a frozen conflict. Anything can erupt at any time, militarily or otherwise. I think we should be cognizant of this when we take every day as if it was yesterday here.
Thank you very much. And we have some questions about the Turkey-Israel relations, European values, and the role of Syria.
Yeah, I'll try to put everything together in a couple of minutes. Cypriot minutes, maybe Middle Eastern minutes. But to go to me, okay. Starting with the Middle East, personally, when it comes to language regulation policies, I disagree, because when we change the language, we feel good about ourselves, that we do something about the issue, and then we just don't care about the content. I mostly care about the content, and you can call it then whatever you want. Call it Middle East, call it Near East, call it West Asia, whatever it is. But if you call it West Asia and it's still written by colonial power, colonial influence, what's the point? I don't care about that. So that's to begin with. Pakistan, I believe Pakistan's role is genuine. I don't believe Iran's or the United States part in that is genuine. I believe it's a whole, it's tactics to gain time for each side's purposes. Okay, so Pakistan is doing a good job. Other countries are helping, Gulf states, some Turkey as well. But this is not about actually finding peace. It's about preparing again for war. The other thing about, what was it, Turkey and Israel. Turkey and Israel had a strategic partnership formed in 1996. And it started changing first when the AKP rose to power, the Justice and Development Party in Turkey, when they started having harsher rhetoric and policies towards Israel. This started in 2004, then 2008, 2009 we had the very famous 1 minute incident in Davos, you know, Erdogan saying 1 minute, I want to talk, and he said that Perez was a killer of children. Then Maviva Marmara, then the next year was the Palmer report of the UN about the Maviva Marmara incident. So it was a timeline of events that led to where we are today. But the main question is, what is the root cause? The root cause is first how the international system changes, as Michalis described before, and how at the regional level, states such as Turkey and Israel find the opportunity, because of the withdrawal of great powers, to pursue their own agendas. And the agendas of both Turkey under the AKP and Israel under Netanyahu are revisionist, meaning that they want to revise the geopolitical status quo to their own benefit, and possibly when and where they can, to expand their influence, be it territorially or otherwise. And it's almost natural and very expected that two revisionist powers that are contesting each other for the same region, for the same area, will in the end clash. And this, of course, has to also to do with their ideologies. If we are talking about Büyük Türkiye, like greater Turkey coming from within Turkey, and Eretz Israel of some sort, like greater Israel in the imaginary of Netanyahu's bunch, then you have them clashing over Palestine, over Syria, over Lebanon, and now they're clashing over Somalia. And God knows what. So obviously the Eastern Mediterranean, which I forgot. Now Turkey thinks that Cyprus is the backyard of Israel. So good luck with that. That's in a nutshell, research of 20 years. And then Syria, when it comes to Syria, you are right about principle. I'm not sure who asked the question, somewhere there. You are right about European values, but you also need to consider that the situation under Assad was very terrible, right? So they opened up the prisons, tens of thousands of prisoners, kids that were born in prison and were growing up in prison. So it's not like we got rid of a good situation and now we have a bad one. Like, we got rid of a bad situation, and if you ask the average Syrian, at least Sunni Syrian, which I speak with many of them very often, they're not, extremely happy about who al-Shara is, but they're very happy that Assad is gone. And right now there is a potential that this might turn into something better, right? We're still at the very beginning of this new transition. And in this kind of post-conflict situations, there's always big problems. There's violence, there is sectarian conflict, there is, crime and all that stuff. I'm all in favor of the European Union and other actors actually rushing in and developing relations with al-Shara if there is a framework of conditionality, meaning that we want to approach you, we are offering this and that to you, if you actually move forward and create a more democratic, a more principled state, if the new constitution is actually better than the previous one, if you actually do what you say, so walk the talk, that you actually be fair with other communities, and if things develop as such, then good. If not, then there should be repercussions. But at the same time, as I said before, we need to keep in mind that Syria is in chaos. So every crime that takes place and every sectarian violence that takes place doesn't mean that comes centrally from the regime itself. There's many loose, jihadi groups that conduct such violent crimes. So we need to be very careful about the information about who does what. And then what was the other one?
About European values, and you have 30 seconds.
I think that was the European values one. I have nothing to say. I addressed that one. There's nothing on Cyprus. I'm sorry to say that. At this point, it's easier to solve the Palestinian issue than the Cyprus problem. I don't know. Well, thank you very much. That's it from now. Apologies.
Thank you.